My name is Charlotte Meyers. Most people just call me Charlie, and I'm 30 years old. As I stood in line outside the Grand Ellington Ballroom in Washington, D.C., a soft drizzle began to fall. The navy silk dress I had picked days ago clung slightly to my skin. But I didn't mind. I had spent nearly 2 weeks perfecting my sister Isabel's graduation speech, and tonight I was going to witness it come to life. It had been years since I attended anything remotely close to a family function, but this felt different, hopeful. Isabel had called me herself, said she wanted me to be part of this milestone. I had imagined us laughing together again, like we used to before everything fractured. Name, please? The young woman at the reception desk asked, scanning a digital guest list on her tablet. I smiled, trying not to let my nerves show. Charlotte Meyers, sister of the graduate. She frowned slightly and tapped again. I'm sorry, what was the last name? Meyers, Meyers. I spelled it slowly, heart already starting to race. She exchanged a look with another attendant, then gave me a careful, polite smile. I don't see your name here. Do you maybe have a paper invitation or QR code? My heart sank. No, I didn't get a formal invitation, but Isabel told me to come. I'm really sorry, she said again. Let me just call someone to check. Before I could respond, I spotted my mother, Clarice Meyers, gliding toward us across the polished marble floor in a deep burgundy gown that probably cost more than my rent. Her heels clicked sharply, her manicured fingers already poised in annoyance. What is the issue here? She asked the staff, not even glancing at me. She says she's with the Meyers party, ma'am, the attendant replied carefully. Mom finally turned her gaze toward me, lips pursing into that familiar line of disapproval. Charlotte, what are you doing here? What do you mean? I asked, genuinely stunned. Isabel said she wanted me here. Mom gave a cold, practiced smile. Yes, she wanted your help with the speech, which you gave. You weren't invited to the gala, Charlotte. This is for family, donors, and honored guests. I blinked, unable to process what I was hearing. I am family. She sighed. You're not on the list. That should have made things clear. My voice cracked slightly. I flew here from Denver. I took off client work. I spent days helping her. My throat tightened. I thought I mattered. Don't be dramatic. Mom waved off my emotion. You're the writer, darling. You write from behind the scenes. This isn't your spotlight. Then came the final blow. She leaned in slightly and whispered, Vendors don't need a seat at the table. The word hit harder than I expected. Vendor, like I was the florist or the caterer, not her daughter, not Isabel's sister. I swallowed hard, turned on my heel, and walked outside into the soft rain. For a few long moments, I stood on the steps of the Grand Ellington, staring at the golden glow inside the ballroom. Through the tall windows, I could see them. Isabel, radiant in her pale blue gown, talking to the dean, my mother standing beside her like a queen regent, basking in borrowed light. And then the mic crackled. The speech began, the one I had written. I recognized every word, every rhythm, every emotional crescendo. The crowd laughed where I had planned for them to laugh. They applauded where I had written the final dramatic beat. No one knew who wrote it, and maybe no one would ever know. But I knew, and I wasn't sure what was worse, being invisible or being used. I stayed frozen there for a while, heart heavy with realization. Then I pulled out my phone, typed a single message to my best friend Monica. She had me write the whole thing. I'm not even on the guest list. They called me the vendor. I think I finally get it. I hit send, wiped a drop of rain, or maybe a tear from my cheek, and walked slowly down the steps, not sure whether I was leaving something behind, or about to take my first step toward something new. I didn't go back to the hotel. Not yet. Instead, I found a quiet bench just across from the ballroom, tucked under the overhang of a bookstore that had already closed for the evening. The city moved on around me, honking horns, clicking heels, the hum of life continuing as if my world hadn't just been quietly dismantled. I stared at the illuminated windows of the gala, watching silhouettes pass behind the tall glass. I knew those outlines. I had memorized Isabel's posture since we were little. Shoulders square, chin slightly raised. Dad used to say she walked like a lawyer even before she knew what the word meant. She was 10. I was 12. Back then, we shared everything: books, secrets, and a nightly ritual of lying in bed whispering until we fell asleep. I used to read to her from whatever I was writing that week: poems, make believe speeches, even little plays where she'd always play the heroine. She'd beg for just one more, eyes wide, curled next to me like I was her whole world. I miss that version of her. That was before Dad died. He'd been our glue, a calm, funny, and endlessly curious man who always encouraged my creativity. While Mom pushed achievement and image, Dad cared about joy. He was the only one who ever sat through my full high school play or framed my poems in the hallway. When cancer took him in the spring of my senior year, the house felt like it imploded inward. And Isabel, she didn't just grieve, she transformed. She stepped into the role of the achiever, the one who made things easier for Mom. She joined debate, got into student government, and learned how to use silence like a sword. Meanwhile, I left for a small writing program in Oregon with nothing but a laptop and Dad's old leather-bound journal. At first, I thought the distance was just a phase. I'd call, leave messages. I sent postcards from every city I visited on my writing jobs: Chicago, Austin, even Paris, when I got sent to ghostwrite for a startup CEO. Sometimes Isabel would respond with a short thanks or an emoji. Mom never did. But I kept trying, because that's what family does, right? When Isabel first reached out to me 3 months ago, out of nowhere, I thought maybe, just maybe, the walls were finally coming down. "Hey, Charlie," her voice had said on that rare voicemail. "I know it's been a while. I was wondering if you'd help me with something. I'm graduating in June, and I need to write a speech, something that feels real, and you've always had that talent." I should have asked more questions, but I didn't. I leapt at the opportunity like a kid hearing the ice cream truck on a summer day. We had a few long calls. I remember one night, she laughed at something I said and called me Lottie, the old nickname only she ever used. I almost cried right there on my living room floor. Maybe she had missed me. Maybe she wanted me there, not just to write her words, but to be a part of her world again. Now, as I sat alone in the dark outside her triumph, the words I'd crafted were echoing through that grand ballroom, while I stood outside like a stranger, a paid ghost. I scrolled back through our messages, rereading them with new eyes. Not once did she say, "Come celebrate with us." It was always, "Can you look over this? Is this punchy enough? How would you end it with something that brings the crowd to its feet?" Never, "I miss you." Never, "Will you be there?" Never, "You matter." My phone buzzed. Monica again. "Do you want me to call you an Uber? Or, do you want to walk back in there?" I stared at her message for a long moment, because truthfully, I didn't know yet. All I knew was this: I had given them my words. Maybe it was time I used my voice. I stood up from the bench and smoothed out my damp dress. Across the street, the gala was in full swing. Laughter trickled out every time someone exited through the gilded doors. A violinist had started playing inside, something elegant and restrained. I didn't belong in that room. That was clear. But part of me, maybe the part that still believed in forgiveness or foolish hope, needed to see it. Not to be included, not to make a scene. I just needed to know. I crossed the street and slipped into the lobby of the building. Security was focused on the doors to the ballroom, so I drifted to the far left, where a side corridor led to a secondary viewing area. A few parents were already in there, sipping wine and watching the main hall through a pane of glass. I stayed near the back, just in time to hear my words. "Good evening, faculty, honored guests, and fellow graduates." Isabel stood tall behind the podium, her voice confident and polished. She wore a sleek navy gown and her signature silver pin, the one Mom gave her after getting elected to the state council. She looked poised, charismatic, powerful, and she was reading every single word I'd written. As she spoke, the crowd nodded, laughed, even wiped tears at the exact emotional beats I'd spent nights fine-tuning. They gasped when she told the story of a little girl losing her father, but finding courage in books and dreams, my story, though she had reframed it just enough to make it sound like hers. It was masterful. It was theft, and no one watching would ever know the difference. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just listened. My body calm, but my heart humming with something I couldn't name. Not yet. A mix of grief, betrayal, and maybe pride. Because despite everything, it was a good speech. It did move people, I did that. I did. I was still processing when someone walked into the viewing room behind me. A tall man with dark curls and tired eyes. He scanned the small crowd, then spotted me. "Charlotte Meyers?" he asked cautiously. I blinked. "Yes?" He stepped closer and extended a hand. "I'm Daniel. I work with Professor Halverson, Isabel's thesis advisor. She told us to keep an eye out for you, in case you drop by." That surprised me. "She said you might want to come, but wouldn't want attention. I've read some of your published speeches," he added. "The one from the Colorado Equality Summit? That was you, right?" I nodded slowly. He smiled, genuine and warm. "You have a gift. I can see Isabel wanted to make a statement tonight. That speech, it has your fingerprints." I didn't say anything. I didn't know how. "I figured," he said quietly, "because it sounded nothing like her previous writing. Just thought you should hear that from someone in the room." He handed me a program. My name wasn't listed anywhere. "Thank you," I said finally, "for saying that." Daniel nodded, then hesitated. "There's an open mic moment at the end. Alumni and family can say a few words. Most people just toast and share memories. If you wanted to, I don't know, say something." I looked down at the program in my hand. The page was heavy, embossed, expensive, beautiful, and I wasn't in it. But that didn't mean I didn't have something to say. "Maybe," I said. Daniel gave a soft smile. "Well, if you do, make it count." He turned and disappeared back into the main hall. I stood there for a long while, holding that program like it weighed 1,000 pounds. What would I say if I spoke? Would I confront them, expose the lie, or could I turn this into something else, something honest, even if no one gave me permission? The same way I had always written, not for recognition, but for truth. The applause from Isabel's final words still echoed faintly through the corridor as I walked slowly toward the ballroom. Guests were rising to their feet. Cameras flashed. Someone uncorked a bottle of champagne. I hovered just outside the main doors. Through the crack, I caught a glimpse of her smiling on stage, surrounded by fellow graduates, the dean of students beside her. She looked like a woman on top of the world. I wondered if she even noticed I wasn't there. Probably not. Inside, the master of ceremonies returned to the podium. "And now," he announced with a warm chuckle, "we open the floor for a few spontaneous remarks. Alumni, faculty, or family members who wish to share a memory, a story, or a few words of wisdom for our graduates." I watched 3 people step up to the mic: a professor who made a joke about law school caffeine dependency, a grandfather who shared an adorable story about his granddaughter's spelling bee victory, and a classmate who quoted Thurgood Marshall. And then, silence. The room waited. The mic stood open. I moved before I could second-guess it. I don't even remember walking down the side aisle. I just remember the feel of the room as I approached the microphone, how it seemed to hush before I'd even spoken. Some people looked confused. A few leaned to whisper. Mom, sitting in the front row in her tailored wine-red dress, went rigid. Isabel, smiling just moments ago, froze. I took a slow breath and gripped the podium like it was the only solid thing in the room. "Good evening," I began. My voice was clear, steady, a miracle. "Most of you don't know me. My name is Charlotte Meyers. Some of you know my sister, Isabel." A few heads turned toward her. The whispering grew louder. "I'm not on your program tonight. I wasn't on the guest list either. In fact, I wasn't supposed to be here at all." Someone in the crowd laughed nervously. I didn't. But I came anyway. Not to cause a scene. Just to say something simple. I looked directly at Isabel then. She didn't look away. I heard a beautiful speech tonight, one I was proud to hear, because I wrote it. Gasps. Audible. Immediate. I wasn't paid, I wasn't credited, I wasn't invited to share this evening with my family. I was simply asked to make something brilliant and then stay quiet while someone else received the applause. Now people were fully turned in their chairs. I don't say this to embarrass anyone, I added quickly. Not even my sister. I say it because I know there's someone else in this room, maybe more than one, who has been the person behind the curtain, the quiet one, the helper, the invisible sibling, the overlooked voice. I paused, letting that land. Sometimes we do that because we love the people who stand in the spotlight. Sometimes we do it because we hope that if we help enough, give enough, we'll finally be seen. My throat tightened, but I kept going. But what I've learned is this. The people who only love you when you're useful don't really love you. They love what you provide. And if you want to be free, really free, you have to love yourself enough to stop performing for their approval. Now the room was completely silent. Not even the servers moved. I took a breath and softened my tone. I wish Isabel well. I truly do. I hope her future is full of success, joy, and honesty. And I hope that one day she'll use her own voice instead of borrowing someone else's. I stepped back, didn't drop the mic, didn't storm out. I simply said, "Thank you for listening," turned, and walked calmly out of the room. Behind me, I heard murmurs erupt, the sound of chairs shifting, a woman's sharp inhale, probably Mom. But I didn't look back, not because I didn't care, but because I cared about myself more. The moment I stepped out into the hallway, my breath came rushing out of me like I'd been holding it for years. Not minutes, years. The walls of the Grand Ellington Ballroom seemed to stretch farther behind me with every step I took. The murmur of voices inside, once intimidating, now felt distant, like waves crashing against the shore of someone else's life. I didn't know if what I had just done would matter to Isabel or Mom, but it mattered to me. I turned a corner toward the lobby, heels clicking against marble. I expected silence, maybe judgmental stares. What I didn't expect was a voice behind me. "Charlie!" I stopped. It wasn't Mom. It wasn't Isabel. It was Jameson Torres, Isabel's classmate, one I remembered from our calls. She had mentioned him once or twice. "Annoyingly nice," she'd said. He caught up to me, slightly breathless. "Hey, sorry, that was... wow. I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" I asked cautiously. "For that speech, not just the one you wrote, but the one you gave. I think a lot of us needed to hear that more than you know." His words caught me off guard. I wasn't sure if I'd just committed social suicide in front of half of DC's legal elite. He laughed. "Maybe, but you also made the room feel something, and that's rare." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, grateful that at least one person saw me as more than a scandal. As he turned to leave, he paused. "By the way, I recognized your work before you even said it. I followed your blog years ago, The Quiet Fire. You wrote about grief like no one else. That piece about your father? I still have it saved." My breath caught. That blog had been dead for years, archived. I hadn't thought anyone remembered it. "Thank you," I said softly. He smiled and disappeared back down the hallway. And just like that, the ground beneath my feet felt a little steadier. I walked back to my hotel in silence, past cafes full of laughter and taxis zipping by. My phone buzzed nonstop, notifications, messages, even a few missed calls. But I didn't open any of them. I needed a moment where no one else could rewrite the narrative. It was almost midnight when I finally checked my texts. From Monica. "You did it. I'm so proud of you, I could scream." From a random number. "Hi, I was at the gala. Just wanted to say your speech meant a lot. My older sisters always treated me like the backup version. Tonight felt like someone cracked that open." From Isabel. "We need to talk." Why would you do that? In front of everyone? You humiliated me. I stared at those 3 messages for a long time. No apology, no acknowledgement, just accusation. For a moment, I almost replied, something soft, something that would smooth the surface again, but I didn't. I clicked out of her texts, then opened a blank note and wrote. I wrote everything I wanted to say, but wouldn't. How I had spent years trying to be enough. How I had twisted myself into whatever shape they needed. How I'd mistaken usefulness for love. How I was done. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much to stay small. The next morning, I ordered coffee to my room and sat by the window, watching the sun rise over the Capitol skyline. An email pinged. Subject line, "Your voice matters." It was from a woman named Lauren Cho, an editor at a mid-sized publishing house. She had attended the gala with her nephew, a graduate. "I don't know if you're represented," the email read, "but your words moved me, both of them. The speech you ghost wrote, and the one you claimed for yourself. If you've ever considered writing a memoir or collection of essays, I'd love to talk." I reread the message 3 times, not trusting my eyes. And then I cried. Not from sadness this time, but from something rare, something unfamiliar, recognition. That night I took a cab to Union Station and caught the late train back to Denver. As the lights of DC disappeared behind me, I closed my eyes, not to escape, but to finally rest. I didn't know what was next with Isabel, or Mom, but for the first time in years, that wasn't the point. Because I wasn't just a ghostwriter anymore. I was a storyteller, and I had finally told my story. 3 months later, I stood in the corner of a small independent bookstore in downtown Denver, nervously watching as a group of strangers slowly took their seats. Some held copies of my book, others just clutched coffee cups and curious expressions. The poster near the entrance read, "Unghosted, Essays on Family, Silence, and Choosing Yourself" by Charlotte Meyers. Tonight, reading plus Q&A with the author. I still wasn't used to seeing my name in print. Lauren Cho had been true to her word. After that night in DC, she followed up relentlessly. Within 6 weeks, I had a book deal. Within 10, I had a deadline and a full editorial schedule. And somehow between freelance writing jobs and late-night bursts of emotional courage, I had finished the manuscript. Not a tell-all, not revenge, just truth. I wrote about being the forgotten sibling, about ghostwriting people's greatest moments while no one remembered your name, about what it means to walk away from your own blood and still wish them healing. Each essay peeled back another layer of my story, and in doing so, invited others to look at their own. My inbox flooded with messages from readers after Lauren quietly posted an excerpt online. I thought I was the only one who felt like a guest in my own family. This made me cry, and then breathe easier. Thank you for writing what I've never been able to say. Their words filled places in me that Isabel and Mom never had, not praise, but understanding. Belonging. The bookstore owner introduced me with a kind smile, then handed me the mic. I didn't tremble this time. I read the final essay in the book, titled "The Table I Built," where I wrote about no longer begging for a seat at theirs, but crafting a new one for myself, surrounded by people who saw me clearly. The applause was soft, reverent. A few people stood. I took a breath. And then I saw her, sitting quietly in the very back row. A hooded coat, blonde hair swept into a loose bun, eyes rimmed with quiet exhaustion. Isabel. I froze for a half second, long enough for Monica, seated near the signing table, to glance back and spot her, too. Her eyebrows raised in question. I gave the tiniest nod. I took questions for another 20 minutes, signed books, smiled, thanked people for coming. But my mind stayed locked on the figure in the back row who hadn't moved since she sat down. When the event ended and the store began to empty, I excused myself from a small circle of readers and walked to the back. Isabel stood up slowly. She looked smaller somehow, less polished than I remembered. "Hi," she said, voice low. "Hi." She held up the book. Her copy, the edges already marked with sticky notes. I read it in one night. I waited. "I don't think I ever understood," she continued, eyes glassy, "how much of you I never bothered to know." "That's because you never asked," I said gently. Not bitter, just honest. I thought being the favorite meant I was the one carrying all the pressure, the weight of mom's expectations. But I never stopped to think that maybe you were carrying something heavier, being erased. That word, erased. I didn't respond immediately. The silence hung between us, not angry this time, but raw. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, she said finally, but I'm trying to understand. I'm in therapy now. James encouraged it after the gala. He's not happy with how I handled things. I nodded. He seemed like someone who sees people clearly. She gave a small, rueful smile. He does. We stood in silence again. Then she held out a small envelope. This is a letter. Not asking for anything, just my side. When you're ready, or not. I took it. Thank you. I don't expect anything, she added quickly. I just wanted you to know that your voice, your actual voice, changed something. In me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like her shadow or her script. I felt like a mirror, reflecting something back at her she couldn't ignore anymore. As she turned to leave, she paused. Charlie? Yeah? I'm proud of you. It was late when I got home. I placed the unopened envelope on my nightstand. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, curled up with a blanket, and stared at the blinking cursor of a new document. Title: Belonging Without Permission. Because now I didn't need anyone's invitation to speak. For 3 days, I didn't open Isabel's letter. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I was afraid of what I might find inside. Too little, too late, or worse, something that might pull me back into a cycle I had just learned to step out of. It sat there, like a quiet guest on my nightstand. Each morning I'd glance at it while sipping my coffee. Each night I'd turn off the lamp beside it, wondering if tomorrow would be the day I'd be ready. It wasn't until Thursday, after a therapy session where I couldn't stop circling the phrase, "she's trying, but it still hurts," that I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet, handwritten, careful, like she'd chosen each word with tweezers. Dear Charlie, I've rewritten this a dozen times. I don't know how to make this perfect, so I'm going to try something else. Honest. You were right. You have always been right. Not just about mom's favoritism or the silence between us, but about the parts of you I chose not to see. I think I learned early on that loving you came with complexity, and I was afraid of it. Afraid of how close we used to be, and how far we drifted after Dad. Afraid that if I acknowledged your pain, I'd have to admit how complicit I was in it. So I chose the easier path: silence, distance, performance. I let mom's narrative become mine because it made me feel safe and special. And in doing so, I made you feel small and invisible. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for using your talent without giving you credit. I'm sorry for calling you only when I needed something. I'm sorry I stood by when you were excluded and said nothing. I don't expect anything from this letter. Not forgiveness, not a phone call, not a reunion. I just wanted you to know. I see it now. I see you now. Love, Isabel. By the time I finished reading, I wasn't crying. I wasn't trembling. I just sat very still. It wasn't a perfect letter. It didn't rewrite the past. But it was the most real thing she'd ever written to me. And maybe that was enough for now. That weekend, I took a walk through Cheeseman Park, my favorite quiet place in Denver. The trees were just starting to bloom, early signs of spring pushing up through winter soil. I watched a little girl run ahead of her mother, arms out like wings, yelling, "I'm flying!" I smiled. There was something sacred about that moment, about running without looking back. I sat on a bench and opened my journal. Not my laptop, not my phone, just pen to paper. Entry, March 12th. Healing isn't a destination. It's not a dramatic reconciliation scene or a tearful hug at an airport. Sometimes it's a letter read quietly in your bedroom. Sometimes it's choosing not to call back right away. Sometimes it's walking through a park alone and realizing you're not lonely, just free. That night, I responded to Isabel. Thank you for your letter. It meant something to me. I'm glad you're doing the work. I am too. I think we both deserve peace, even if we find it on separate paths. No pressure to continue this. Just thank you for seeing me. I didn't expect her to reply, but she did. Same to you, Charlie. Wherever this leads, I'm rooting for you. Always was. Just didn't know how to show it. It was a small exchange, a crack of light through a long-closed window. I didn't fling the window open. I didn't throw away the years of pain. But I noticed the light, and that for now was enough. A month after I opened Isabel's letter, I found myself sitting in a sunlit cafe off Colfax Avenue with my laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Not stuck, just still. I wasn't sure what I was writing yet. A second book, a series of essays, a TED Talk pitch? It didn't really matter. What mattered was that I didn't feel like I was trying to prove anything anymore. Not to Mom, not to Isabel, not even to myself. I was just telling the truth. Truth, it turns out, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quietest voice in the room, the one that no longer needs to scream to be heard. That's who I was becoming. In the months since my book launch, life had grown both simpler and fuller. I'd started hosting a monthly writer's circle in my studio, a mix of memoirists, poets, and burnt-out creatives just trying to find their way back to their own voices. The group called itself Unmuted. We'd gather with wine and tea, sharing rough drafts and vulnerable essays that never made it to Instagram. Some stories were about estranged fathers, others about toxic friendships, religious trauma, even the small, insidious griefs that no one validates, like realizing your mom only calls when your sister is in town. We never judged. We listened. We didn't fix. We witnessed. That became my new definition of family. People who stay to witness you. Who hold space when you don't have the words yet? Who say, take your time, I'm still here. One night, after the circle had ended and the room was scattered with empty mugs and the faint scent of lavender, Zoe, my friend, and the closest thing I'd ever had to a sister outside biology, lingered. You seem lighter, she said, curling her legs beneath her on the couch. I am, I replied. Not because everything's healed, but because I stopped carrying what wasn't mine. Zoe tilted her head. Like what? The shame, the silence, the need to be useful in order to be loved. She smiled. You always thought love had to be earned. I did. I nodded. Now I think love is chosen, again and again, especially when it's hard. And sometimes, chosen family loves better than the ones who share your DNA. We sat there quietly for a moment, that kind of stillness only possible when nothing's left to prove. Then Zoe said something I didn't expect. Would you ever consider writing about us? About this version of family? It made me pause. Not because I hadn't thought about it before, but because I finally felt ready. The next morning, I opened a new document. Title: Chosen Blood subtitle: How I Built a Family from the Ashes of the One That Burned Me. In the opening paragraph, I wrote, there was a time when I would have walked barefoot across glass for a seat at their table. Now I build my own, and it's crowded with people who speak truth over performance, care over appearances, presence over perfection. This isn't a revenge story. It's a resurrection. I stopped and read it back to myself. Yes, that was it. That was the voice I'd buried for years, not ghostwriting, not whispering, not begging, witnessing, writing, reclaiming. Later that week, Isabel texted, Emma's due any day now. I know we haven't talked much since the letter, but I just wanted to say, if you want to meet her, the door's open. I stared at the message, heart oddly calm. I didn't respond right away. I didn't feel pressure to. Instead, I went for a walk, watched the tulips blooming in neighbors' yards, listened to my breath. Maybe I'd go, maybe not. But for the first time, the decision felt like mine, not based in guilt, not rooted in obligation, but grounded in choice. Because that's what healing gives you, options. I didn't decide right away. The text about Emma's birth sat unread for 2 days. Not because I was ignoring it, but because I wanted to make sure my response came from a place of clarity, not reflex. I had learned the difference. There was a time when I would have dropped everything, booked a flight, and showed up at the hospital with a handmade baby blanket, hoping that maybe this time I'd be invited back into the family, back into love. But I wasn't that girl anymore. So when I finally replied, I kept it simple. I'd like to meet her. On my terms. Let's plan something small. Just us. No crowd, no ceremony. Isabel replied almost immediately. Of course, I understand. Just you, me, and Emma. Whenever you're ready. And so, 2 weeks later, I found myself standing on the porch of her modest townhouse in Arlington, a soft rattle in one hand and my heart in the other. Isabel opened the door slowly. She looked exhausted, her hair in a messy braid, no makeup, dark circles under her eyes. But for once, I didn't read her appearance as a sign of weakness. It was real, raw, human. "Hey," she said, voice low. "Hey." She stepped aside, and I walked in. The living room was simple. Neutral tones, a faint scent of lavender baby lotion, and a bassinet beside the couch. A sleepy cooing sound drifted from it. My throat tightened. "Can I?" I asked. Isabel nodded. "Of course." I moved slowly, quietly, careful not to startle the tiny creature inside. And then I saw her, Emma. 8 pounds of squish, soft fuzz, and little fists clenched like she was ready to challenge the whole world. My chest ached, not with pain, not with regret, with something else. Something fragile and enormous and unfamiliar. I picked her up gently, supporting her head like I'd seen in those endless parenting books I used to ghostwrite chapters for. She squirmed once, then settled against my chest. And in that moment, my body stilled, my mind quieted, and something inside me that had been holding its breath for decades finally exhaled. "You're a natural," Isabel whispered. I didn't answer right away, just rocked Emma gently, listening to her tiny breathing, marveling at how such a small life could fill such a big silence. "I've been afraid," Isabel admitted, sitting across from me, "that I wouldn't know how to love her in the right ways, that I'd pass down the things Mom gave us." I looked at her then, really looked, and for once, I didn't see the polished graduate. The golden child, the girl who got all the praise. I saw a woman trying to break a cycle. "You're not Mom," I said, "but even if you mess up, and you will because we all do, it's not about being perfect. It's about being honest, repairing instead of pretending, listening instead of controlling." She nodded slowly, eyes damp. "I want her to know love that isn't conditional," she said. "The kind I didn't know how to give you when we were kids." I paused, then reached over and placed my free hand on hers. "She's already got something we never did," I said softly. "A mother who's willing to learn." Later, when I was about to leave, Isabel walked me to the door. "I know it's going to take time," she said, "but I'm here. If you ever want to talk, or just be." I gave her a small smile. "I don't know what our relationship will look like," I said, "and I'm not ready to erase everything that happened just because this moment was good." "I know. But I'm open. Carefully." And then she smiled back. "Careful is okay." We hugged. Not long, not theatrical, just real. Two sisters with bruised histories and maybe, just maybe, a shared future. As I walked down her driveway, I glanced back one more time. Isabel stood holding Emma, who blinked out at the world with those brand new eyes. Eyes that didn't carry our past. Eyes that didn't know favoritism or silence or betrayal. Just love. Maybe that was the point. We don't always get the family we deserved growing up, but sometimes if we're lucky, we get the chance to become that kind of family for someone else. 1 year after that night at the gala, after the speech, after the letter, after Emma, I found myself standing in a lecture hall in Chicago, facing a crowd of 200 people. Not family, not friends, strangers, readers, students, survivors of similar silences. I was there to speak not about writing technique or publishing tips, but about voice, the kind that's not heard through a microphone, but fought for through pain, patterns, and choosing yourself over and over again. Behind me was a projected slide that simply read, "Stop trying to belong where you're only tolerated. Build where you're celebrated." The room was quiet. Not awkward, not bored, just listening. I took a deep breath. I used to think healing meant reconciliation, I said. That if I just worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, made myself useful enough, I'd finally get the love I longed for. But the truth is, healing isn't about getting them to change. It's about recognizing that you don't need to shrink yourself to fit the space they gave you. A few heads nodded. A few eyes welled up. I saw people clutching notebooks, others holding their breath. I continued. I was the sister behind the speech, the ghostwriter behind the spotlight. And for a long time, I believed that being unseen was the cost of being close to the people I loved. But eventually I realized that if being close meant being erased, then I wasn't really close. I was performing. The words weren't bitter anymore. They were clean, like air after a storm. I closed the talk with something I had written just days before. There are families made by birth and families made by choice. And sometimes the most radical act of love is choosing yourself first, so that one day, when someone else needs permission to be fully seen, you can look them in the eye and say, "I went first, and you can too." The applause was quiet at first, then steady, then rising. And as I stepped off that stage, I didn't feel like I had proved anything. I just felt free. Back home in Denver, spring had arrived early. The tulips were already peeking out, and my local bookstore had restocked uncoasted for the third time. Monica and I sat at our favorite coffee shop, me with an oat latte, her with something aggressively herbal. "So," she said, leaning forward, "are you ready to be Emma's cool aunt who takes her to feminist art exhibits yet?" I laughed. "I'm working up to it." "She's going to love you." "I know," I said, not out of arrogance, but because, finally, I did. That night, I received a photo from Isabel. It was Emma, dressed in a tiny onesie that read, "Tiny but mighty." Attached was a voice memo. Isabel's voice, quiet but warm. "Emma took her first steps today. I thought you should know. I hope one day she walks toward you, not because I tell her to, but because she wants to. Because she knows you're someone who'll see her, not for what she can do or how well she behaves, but just for being her." I pressed the phone to my chest and closed my eyes. We may never be the sisters we once were. We may never be a Hallmark family. But maybe, just maybe we were something else, honest. Healing, human. To the person reading this or hearing it through a screen, if you've ever been erased, excluded, or reduced to a role instead of being embraced as a person, this story is for you. You are not too much. You are not invisible. You were simply standing in a room where no one was looking. Find the rooms where they do. And if they don't exist, build one. I'll save you a seat.